So in the last video, we talked about a number of different kinds of relationships that you might look for between variables and how those would look if you were to make a graph of your results. I want to try to make that a little more concrete in terms of if you were actually going to go out and collect data, what would that look like? And how would you take it from the point of asking someone a question, of measuring something about a person, and then transforming that into some data and transforming that into a graph. So this is going to be some of the same stuff that we've just talked about, but trying to be a little more specific in what it would actually look like. So for this example, I'm going to just come up with a silly set of variables to look at. Let's say that we wanted to look at spinach consumption and let's say intelligence. This is not based on any actual research. To my knowledge, I don't think this has actually been done, but we're going to say that we want to find out if there is a relationship between spinach and intelligence. So there are a few different ways that we could do that. One way would be to divide people into some groups and then compare scores between those groups. That is a general approach. So let me show you what I mean by that. We could say that we are just going to ask people. We're going to give them a little questionnaire. It's going to say, do you eat spinach? And they're just going to answer yes or no on the questionnaire. And we're going to categorize them into two different groups based on that. So we're going to have one group that eats spinach and the other group that eats no spinach. And when we actually get this information in, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the let's say IQ for each of these people. So we ask them, do you eat spinach? And we give them an IQ test. So what we would get then is we would get data that looks like this. We would get for participant number 1, let's say that they eat spinach. So they would go here, and let's say their IQ is 130. And then for participant number 2, let's say that they also eat spinach and their IQ is 120. And I'm just completely making this up as I go along. And for number 3, let's have someone who doesn't eat spinach, and let's say that their IQ, it comes out to 105. So what I'm trying to show you is I'm trying to show you the steps you would actually go through if you were trying to answer a question like this. And one possibility is you go out and you have a technique for measuring these variables. One of them measures the categorical variable of whether the person eats spinach or not by asking them, do you eat spinach? They answer yes or no. And then the other gets the quantitative value of their IQ. They get a numerical score for the other variable, which is their IQ. So when we have one variable that is categorical and the other is numerical or quantitative, then we're going to probably, in this case, want to display this using a bar chart. So that would look something like, we're going to see, this is down here is whether they eat spinach or not. So we have people who say yes, and we have people who say no. And probably what we're going to do is we would take each of these columns and we would add up the scores. So if we add these up, we come out with 395 for people who eat spinach, and a total score of 310 for people who don't eat spinach. We would probably want to put this in our bar chart, not as a sum total, but as an average. So we might do something like we might calculate an average, which would mean, well, we have 1, 2, 3 scores. So we would divide the total by 3, which would give us a value of about 130. It's like 131.67 if we want to be exact. And it doesn't matter really because this is made up data. But for the no spinach group, we would divide that by 3 as well, because we also have 3 participants in that group, in that category. So we would divide that and we would get an average of 103.33. Okay? So then we would just come over and we would say, well, let's say this is about this. So this axis is IQ over here, and let's say this is about 150 up here. So maybe this our average for people who eat spinach, average IQ is about 130. So let's say, I don't know, that's approximately correct. This is very, very inexact. And what we know is that it was substantially lower, a substantially lower IQ for people who didn't eat spinach, who reported not eating spinach. So that is just to give you an idea of one way that you could approach something where you're just looking for, is there a relationship between two variables? And I'm going to measure one in terms of categories. Eat spinach, don't eat spinach, or you could, for example, look at males versus females, or you could look at different political groups or ethnic groups, different ways that you can divide people up into groups or categories. And then we measure the other variable, we measure in terms of a numerical amount, a quantity. So one variable is qualitative or categorical, the other is numerical or quantitative. And in this case, what would you be able to conclude from this? Well, you would be able to conclude something like people who eat spinach have higher IQs than people who don't, right? And I mean, that is what we have shown here, is there's this difference, and we will get into later the idea of whether this is a statistically significant difference, that sort of issue. But assuming that it is a statistically significant difference, then, okay, we have shown that people who eat spinach have higher IQs. So that is the conclusion we can make about the relationship between these variables. But this is not the only way we could have done this, or necessarily even the best way that we could have explored this question. So in the next video, I'll show you another way that we could have measured the scores and graphed this in quite a different way.